And I just like this guy, possibly a psychic, had this like moment where he saw something and he was like, oh, I gotta go, I gotta save this kid. And he didn't sound like, it sounds like his ability, whatever it was, was only a few moments ahead in time, which is why he had to rush to get to the kid. It was November 1943. The witness, Frank McKay, then 16, had returned home from work. It was quite late. At the time, he was employed as a cinema projectionist. He made himself something to eat and proceeded to munch on his food by the fireplace, which was in their kitchen, which also served as a living room and a bedroom. This was at his mother's two-roomed ground floor tenement. His mother was already in bed in a small alcove near the fire. The two chatted about the events of the day, the blackouts, food rationing, and even the movies that they were showing at the cinema that Frank worked. Frank noted that it was typical for his mother to be in bed when he got home from work, which was usually around 11 p.m., though she didn't actually fall asleep until he was home and safe, and the two had chatted for a bit. On this night, his mother was noticeably disturbed by something. She drew his attention to a wall mirror which was situated above the mantelpiece. In his write-up to SPI newsletter circa 1989, he attempted to recreate the dialogue shared between him and his mother with regards to the mirror the night in question. In regards as to what follows in my recollection of the incident, it is important that it is understood that the dialogue and actions recorded here are exactly in the order as to what happened. In attracting my attention to the mirror, my mother said, "Frank, there's something odd about the mirror tonight." "What do you mean odd, Mom?" "Stand up and look at the mirror. See for yourself," she replied. Frank did as suggested and stood up. He moved quite close to the mirror and stared hard at it. Apart from the distraction caused by the usual reflected glare of the bright gas mantle, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Looks normal enough to me, Mom," he replied. "Don't you see anything unusual at all?" Frank peered harder at the mirror but observed only his reflection. He shrugged. "Nothing, Mom. I assure you it's just the same old mirror to me." Frank noted that the mirror was actually a fairly modern item. He had only purchased it some 6 months earlier. His mother made sure to keep it spotlessly clean. She was a bit of a neat freak. "Then I must be seeing things, an illusion or something. I can see something in that mirror that shouldn't be there." Frank admitted that he was starting to become concerned. My mother was a very level-headed lady, hardly the type to imagine things, and although she wore glasses for close-up work and reading, she was normally long-sighted and with good vision in that respect. Frank moved across the floor to the alcove beside her. "What is it that you see in the mirror, Mom?" he asked. "Before I tell you, son, I want you to look at the mirror from here, at the same angle at which I'm looking at it. Perhaps that way you'll see what I'm seeing too." At that, Frank sat down on a chair close to the bed and stared across the room and up at the mirror, and that's when he saw it. In the top right-hand corner of the glass, I saw the vivid, glowing image of a cuddly toy rabbit. It was sitting in a low-crouched position, side-on, facing left. It was light blue in color with a large, bold pink ribbon on its neck. A brown glass eye staring back at me. It was as solid in appearance as any reflected object could be expected to be, and apart from its strange phosphorescent glow, and the fact that there was no such object near the mirror to be thus reflected. Naturally, I was both startled and surprised, but within seconds I was composed enough to describe what I beheld in the mirror to my mother, who immediately and gratefully concurred that it was the exact same image she was seeing. According to my mother, she had seen the image gradually appearing in the mirror during the period of our earlier conversation. Frank's mother admitted to him that for a long time she thought it was merely a trick of the light, or her imagination. It was only when the image had reached its final glowing vividness had she seen fit to attract her son's attention to the mirror. Never once prior to seeing the image myself had she described it as a rabbit, toy or otherwise, possibly to avoid affecting me by autosuggestion. Not only did my mother and I share this odd experience, we also shared the mutual thrill of witnessing a phenomenon. I remember feeling surprised at our joint cool-headedness during the experience. Mind you, the image of a cuddly toy rabbit can hardly be considered upsetting, in spite of the mysterious way it had manifested itself in our mantelpiece mirror. Several times I moved forward and back from the alcove to the mirror, noticing each time that the closer I got to the mirror, the less vivid the image became. In fact, at about 12 inches from the mirror, only the nearest trace of the outline of the rabbit was discernible. Then, after about 20 minutes from the time of its manifestation, the image of the toy rabbit began to fade. Within 5 minutes, it was completely gone. Frank offered a rough estimation of the duration, believing that it lasted from 11:35 p.m. to 12 a.m. In spite of regular observations during the stated times and other random periods, the manifestation never happened again. We had the mirror for years after that, but never again did anything untoward ever appear in it. Frank attempted to look into the history of the mirror. About a year or so later, I confided this story to the shopkeeper who sold us the mirror. He could tell me little or nothing of its history prior to it coming into his care. However, he did state that the mirror was stored for some time in his attic stockroom, where it rested against a corner wall next to a consignment of cuddly toys, including a powder blue rabbit with a pink ribbon.
It's interesting to think that maybe the mirror had kind of retained memory of that period in its history. I know that the mirror isn't sentient, so it can't have memories. But is it possible that for some reason that moment in its history imprinted on it, and it was reflecting it back at these people? I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like a residual haunting, where something plays out in the past, almost like it's been recorded, and it plays out in the past, over and over again, completely unaware of the fact that time has moved on. It almost seems like that, or it could have just been a glitch where something got messed up and it was reflecting something that it shouldn't have been reflecting. I don't know. It's so strange.
Are superheroes real? To a man in London, he believes they just might be. In a 1982 issue of the Unexplained magazine, a man named E.J. Branwell of Brixton described a very strange incident that occurred while he was out shopping. A couple of years ago, I was at a large London store, Peter Robinson's, on Oxford Street. I was standing at a counter on the ground floor when I felt compelled to look up at the up escalator, which was roughly opposite. But there seemed to be nothing unusual. Two women, one middle-aged and the other, presumably her daughter, much younger, were about to carry a child, still in its push-up chair, up the escalator. That's when Bramwell noticed a sudden commotion. The next thing I knew, a young man was running through the shoppers, pushing people aside quite roughly. It crossed my mind that he could be a shoplifter being pursued by store detectives. He was running towards the escalator. Bramwell claims that he and several of the shoppers around him looked in the man's general direction, watching him, searching for a reason for his running. At that point, there was nothing in particular to see. The two women seemed to be coping quite well with the child in his pushchair, which was now balanced on the steps between them. The young man reached the bottom of the escalator and pounded up the steps. As he got to within 3 steps of the lower woman, the pushchair suddenly slipped and the baby fell out, straight into his arms. There was no question about it. He had set out before the danger was apparent, with a terrific sense of urgency to save the baby. And as far as the onlookers were concerned, it was no coincidence that he got there just in time. Judging by the comments I overheard, everyone else seemed amazed at his reaction. Although how can you have a reaction to something that hasn't happened?
This case reminded me of, remember that video that was floating around a few years ago? I think it happened in Russia, but I could be mistaken. But it was featured on Paranormal Caught on Camera, and it had like this guy was walking along. I think he was like in a black coat or something, and he was walking along, and he tapped this vendor or something on the shoulder, and the vendor looked to his right, and it was right at the moment a truck went by, and there was like, I don't know, a gate or something came off or something, and it almost hit him. But because that person was there to tap him on the shoulder, he turned his head just in time to see it, and it ended up saving his life. And the person that tapped him on the shoulder didn't interact with him in any way. He just sort of tapped him on the shoulder and just kept on walking, which is kind of odd. Usually you'd say, hey, how's it going, or something. But in this case, he just carried on, and it was really strange. And it's fun to think about this, that superheroes might actually exist, that there might be these, people walking around with enhanced abilities. It sounds like this person might have been some type of psychic or something, or have some kind of ability where he could see possibly moments into the future, where like if he had this power and he had observed it, a day ahead, he might have, done something to make it so that they didn't get on the escalator, or he might have, talked to them, or something that, got in the way of that moment. But because he was rushing to them, it sounds like his ability only worked within moments. Like he had it, and then he had to get going to kind of save this baby from falling. It's fun to think about that there might be people out there that have, abilities that are beyond what humans are capable of.